Cameroonians should resist the temptation to equate silence with fear or failure. One thing we know about Tchiroma, whether one sees him as a controversial figure, an opportunist, or an unpredictable political survivor, the fact is he rarely throws away a dramatic gesture. His political career has been built on visibility, messaging, and the art of returning to the stage when it matters most. If he intended to walk away quietly, he would never have given the 48-hour ultimatum. He could have negotiated behind the scenes quietly, issued gentle suggestions, or stayed away from the conversation altogether. He has done this before. He joined the government. But this time, he chose confrontation. That tells us something else. The silence is likely strategic. It is not spontaneous. Dear viewers, you're welcome to the Beyond Africa podcast with me, your host, Ngalim Bernard. At the Beyond Africa podcast, we tell stories that change lives. Today, we are back in Cameroon, where we discuss the Cameroonian political atmosphere. Chiroma is the man of the day. His strategies, his statements, and his silence are more important today than they have ever been in the past. But Cameroonians are questioning why he is so silent. So today, in the next 7 points, I detail what I see as Chiroma's strategy or what circumstances are forcing Tchiroma to adopt as strategy. In politics, circumstances and intentional calculation determine the path to political action. That is what we are going to discuss here today. As usual, thank you all for watching. Thank you all for subscribing, commenting, liking, and sharing. That is the best way you give us the impetus, the energy to continue going. We are a few subscribers short of 15,000 subscribers. Thank you so much for all the energy you are giving us and all the private and public messages you are sharing with us about the value that we bring to you. That is the objective we seek to bring to you. We seek to bring value so that we understand what is happening in Africa's political landscape. This is not only about Cameroon, it's about Africa. And definitely, I promise you, I'm bringing in a high-profile African over the next few days to talk about the situation in Cameroon with a lens from an international perspective. This African has observed elections in different African countries, has participated in elections in different African countries, and has developed a continental voice that determines and shapes public policy across Africa. So stay tuned and hit the subscription button so when the interview with him drops, you'll be the first to know. After Chiroma's 48-hour ultimatum, the silence in Cameroon is pregnant. The atmosphere is questionable. Since Tchiroma gave the government 48 hours to release all political prisoners, there is a particular kind of silence in the Cameroonian political landscape that has become louder than noise, louder than speeches, and louder than statements and even action. After Chiroma's deadline came and went, anti-Chiroma voices are probably jubilating and claiming that Tchiroma is a helpless man without the capacity to force government into any form of action. However, on the other side, Chiroma's supporters and the common man are understandably asking the following questions. What next? Has Tchiroma backed down? Has something strange happened? Should people expect a follow-up? Or was Tchiroma just doing a one-man show as a form of political drama? These are the right questions, and they reflect a country that has learned through decades, 43 years of experience, that nothing in Cameroon's political arena happens in a straight line. But before anxiety turns into speculation, it is important to have a deep breath, observe, and analyze the moment with clarity. Let's get back to the substance of our conversation. Silence does not always mean retreat. In fact, in politics, silence often signals negotiations, recalibration, and an assessment of the consequences of previous action and the potential consequences of future action. This commentary is reading the political atmosphere as it stands today, and to outline why Cameroonians should remain calm, not because all is well, but because political actors rarely abandon moves that have already captured public attention. When someone like Chiroma speaks with the force with which he spoke, the determination and the depth in his breath, then falls silent, the story is generally not over. The story is simply starting. As I told you, we are going to read the political landscape in Cameroon over 7 points. Please kindly go to the comments section and tell us what you think about Chiroma's silence. And at the end of the podcast, tell us which of the 7 points you feel most aligned with and which of them you think is important for Chiroma to work on as he prepares to liberate Cameroonians. And the first of those points is situating the moment. Let us situate the moment of Chiroma's ultimatum to the government of Cameroon, then his subsequent silence. Chiroma did something highly unusual. He issued an ultimatum to the very system that he had defended for more than 10 years. For a politician known largely for loyalty, this marked a clear departure from his loyalty, from where he had been for at least 10 years. Many supporters were surprised. Many opponents were skeptical. But everyone understood that a line had been crossed. Ultimatums in Cameroonian politics are not issued frivolously, especially not on matters as sensitive as political prisoners. When someone with Chiroma's profile takes that public risk, it is rarely an act of impulsion or emotion. It usually reflects a strategic decision shaped by internal pressures, political calculations, and or changing alliances. Public ultimatums are hardly ever meant to expire. They are openings, not conclusions. They simply set a pace. The expiration of an ultimatum at a particular clock hour does not mean that the action that is going to follow must start immediately at that clock hour. The action that follows could start a week, a month, or a few months after. But for it to have weight, it starts within a calculated, reasonable time period. However, Cameroonians should understand that Chiroma must have not made this statement as a consequence of emotions, but as a consequence of tactical calculations. The second point is Cameroonians should resist the temptation to equate silence with fear or equate silence with failure. One thing we know about Chiroma, whether one sees him as a controversial figure, an opportunist, or an unpredictable political survivor, the fact is he rarely throws away a dramatic gesture. His political career has been built on visibility, messaging, and the art of returning to the stage when it matters most. If he intended to walk away quietly, he would never have set a public countdown in motion. He would never have given the 48-hour ultimatum. He could have negotiated behind the scenes quietly, issued gentle suggestions, or stayed away from the conversation altogether. He has done this before. He joined the government. But this time, he chose confrontation, publicity, and timing. That tells us something else. The silence is likely strategic. It is not spontaneous. He has been there, he has seen it, and he knows how to confront it. Remember, he even issued a playbook telling the government that he knows their play style. He told them the first step they do is prevent people from running on elections. The next step is rigging the elections. The next step is arresting people, detaining people, and spreading around false information. So Chiroma does not come across as someone who is ignorant of the current system that he is fighting against. Our third point is noting the political climate today is not what it has been for 10 years or even 5 years ago. 7 years ago, we were all talking about Kamto. 10 years ago, we were all talking about the war in the northwest and the southwest southern Cameroons. However, public patience is running thin. People are getting tired. Cameroonians do not trust the public and government institutions. Cameroonians over the last few years have shown that the government is not a trustworthy institution. That is why most of them boycotted the elections. The few that registered, voted, and did everything possible to capture the data that shows who won at their polling stations. The government kicked that out. The Constitutional Council did not make things better. All the cases before the Constitutional Council were either dismissed or considered irrelevant or inadmissible, as lawyers would call them. But that does only one thing. It instills fear in Cameroonians, not because Cameroonians like to be afraid, but because the government uses the military, and mostly military in non-military attire, to arrest Cameroonians. More than 2,000 Cameroonians have been arrested and some have been tortured following this past election. Therefore, fear still exists, of course, but the government's monopoly on the narrative is weakening. The government has used the state media, CRTV, for so many years that they believe that CRTV is the only organ that can communicate with Cameroonians. Even independent and private media, like Equinox TV, that were the last men standing, have been bullied into compliance with the government's position. That is why independent media, like the Beyond Africa podcast and others, are standing up for freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and freedom of opinion. We cannot be bullied. Why? Because we do not depend on the government, and the government does not have any control over us. We have direct communication with anyone who wants to understand African stories from an African perspective. We do not have an editorial policy that shapes what we say. We do not have a producer that sings into our ears what we should say. We say it and we give you the opportunity to come for a conversation. We are inviting everyone to come to the Beyond Africa podcast for an interview. You share your views. We simply ask probing questions so that we get to know you better, get to know your ideas better, and of course, the viewers will get your position better. Once you make your opinion here, it is clear it is your opinion, it is not ours. The civic space, the media space in Cameroon is narrowing and is weakening. The government knows this, the opposition knows this, and the international community knows this. Certainly, Tchiroma knows this. And when the political environment becomes this fragile, every actor operates with heightened caution. Chiroma's next move will not be driven by emotion. It will be calculated to maximize pressure while minimizing self-destruction. Those who expect him to run back into the public sphere with panic misunderstand his political instinct. He will return, but he will return in a manner crafted to reshape the conversation, not to repeat the same statement. When he came out a week ago to give a statement about the ultimatum to the government, most people did not expect that he was going to come from that direction. He came from that direction, gave the ultimatum, because that is what his calculations must have told him. If he were going to go the emotional route, he might have said a different thing. So, give time to time and let time produce its own fruits. The fourth point of our conversation is the public should understand that ultimatums in authoritarian and dictatorial systems rarely produce immediate concessions. The political prisoners that Chiroma spoke about are at the heart of the regime's insecurity. They represent political dissent, electoral pressure, and evidence of the system's struggle to control a narrative that is slipping through their fingers. You know, the government has always been the loudest. Even when Chiroma was in government, he always shaped the narrative, and the government's narrative always won the day. But in 2025, with the advent of independent media, the government is unable to shape the narrative, and Chiroma, being a strategic, eloquent, and coherent communicator, is able to take the lead in the communication. So when Chiroma demanded the release of political prisoners within 2 days, everyone understood it was unlikely to happen instantly. The value of the ultimatum was not in the expectation of overnight compliance, but in creating a public confrontation that the regime cannot easily ignore. That confrontation continues. Nothing about the underlying tension has changed simply because the clock struck 48 hours and nothing was done. We all saw the government release some political prisoners in Gaoundere, Douala, Chang, Bafang, etc. And that is not a sign of compliance according to the government, but a reaction in fear of Chiroma's next steps. The government could now say, oh, but we released some after Chiroma asked for their release. That is not what Chiroma said. Chiroma said all political prisoners. The bulk of the arrestees, whether arrested in 1990 or in 2025, remain in prison. The fifth point of our reflection is that silence creates one important opportunity. One important opportunity. It gives the public time to watch how the regime responds, not to Chiroma's words directly, but to the environment that they triggered. Remember, we just said Chiroma's ultimatum was not really meant for the detainees to be released within 48 hours, but to create a political condition, a political environment where there is political tension that would generate certain conditions. So the question here is, will detainee conditions change? Will the legal processes accelerate? Will other political elites speak? Will other opposition candidates join Chiroma? Will the security forces tighten or loosen their pressure? Will civil society organizations engage and fully take part in the next steps? Will citizens continue to show an interest in defending their votes? Will the diaspora fully participate in education, funding, and awareness raising? Will military personnel continue defecting and joining to support Chiroma? These indicators and others will shape the next phase. I was telling a friend today that Chiroma himself at this material moment is surprised at what is happening to him and he needs to change strategies. 1 month ago, Chiroma did not know that he was going to have such amazing and overwhelming support from Cameroonians. But he has it. How does he re-strategize to fit the moment? You know, as he is building up his base, he is having other people come to join him. Be they politicians, be they financiers, be they funders, they all come together and propose different things to Chiroma. And you remember the old saying, he who pays the piper determines the tune. So anybody who is bringing any contribution of value to Chiroma wants to shape Chiroma's strategy. Sometimes all these strategies do not blend. They do not work together. One could be prioritized over another. One might need to come before another, but the stakeholders who are bringing in these strategies might not consider this. So Chiroma and his teams need time to flesh this out. And I believe that there are working groups and think tanks around Chiroma that are shaping things out in order to ensure that his next outing fits the moment, fits the purpose, and leads to the final objective. Because we need to remember that political moves like these are often followed by a coordinated phase of back-channel negotiation. It is entirely possible that conversations are happening quietly, conversations that cannot be made public. In politics, what is visible is never the full story. The full story happens behind the scenes. Nobody sees what happens. A few people come out and give a representation of what might have been discussed behind the scenes. So the stakeholders and all those who are doing the negotiations have a critical role to play. Their voices need to be heard, and Chiroma is in a position where he must make certain decisions at a time when he was not prepared or might not be ready to make those decisions. But the overwhelming support and cries of Cameroonians that he is listening to, that he is hearing them say, is influencing him as he makes those choices. He's been very clear that Cameroon is going to have new leadership, come what may, because Cameroonians voted for that new leadership in the ballot box. Our sixth point is that there is a psychological aspect that Cameroonians should recognize. For years, at least for 43 years, the system operated on predictability. That is, the same voices, the same narratives, the same defenses. But Chiroma's ultimatum disrupted this predictability. Is there anyone who is surprised that the CPDM rigged the elections? Or is there anyone who is surprised that the Constitutional Council declared Paul Biya the winner? Is there anyone who is surprised that as soon as citizens start demonstrating peacefully on the streets, they are met with live bullets? Is there anyone who is surprised that when Chiroma called for the ghost towns, they decided to move around forcing people to open their shops? No one is surprised. For 43 years, this system has built a mechanism that can be read, and it is all built on force. So breaking down a 43-year system takes time, takes strategy, takes resources, takes energy, takes people to work on that. And since the regime now has to calculate how to deal with someone who knows their internal language, its communication machinery, and its vulnerabilities, Chiroma on his own part needs to outwork them and outsmart them. He needs to be ahead of them. That is why we say Chiroma's silence may just be pregnant. It may not only be silence. It is silence that, when it gives birth, re-energizes and gives new momentum to Cameroonians. That alone ensures that the matter is far from resolved. Simply because when a long-time ally breaks ranks, the regime cannot simply ignore him. Silence is common, but silence is not dismissal. The regime cannot ignore Chiroma. They know what Chiroma can do. Chiroma defended them, played their PR role, and gave them good reputation over the years. So they know that what comes out of Chiroma's mouth is likely going to be met either with appreciation or rejection. But they also know that anyone Chiroma is talking to understands that Chiroma understands the inner workings of the regime, and whatever he says is given credibility. So meanwhile, the public should resist being drawn into panic. Moments like this often tempt actors, both political and civilian, to rush to conclusions, assume the worst, or declare that everything is lost. Should Cameroonians really be trying to declare that everything is lost, or the panic that we see, that we hear on social media about Chiroma, should that really be what Cameroonians are looking for or what Cameroonians are giving out there? However, Cameroon is entering a new political phase in which major actors are repositioning themselves for the future. Moves that may appear chaotic or confusing are often part of long-term strategies whose results are not immediately visible. Whatever is happening at this material moment may not tell us what Chiroma is doing, but its outcome may be in the long term, and the strategies to take us there need a lot of tactical reasoning and tactical maneuvering. And the final point for our reflection is Chiroma will definitely return because political relevance requires continuity. If Chiroma disappears from the political environment for the next 1 month, he loses everything. He loses his political capital. Nobody will think about him in the next few weeks, and Cameroonians will definitely consider him a loser. Because no politician issues an ultimatum that dominates the national conversation and then disappears permanently. Chiroma will definitely be back. He gave the orders. He encouraged Cameroonians to go demonstrate. They went. He asked Cameroonians to observe ghost towns. They did. Is it at this moment that Chiroma is going to disappear? He knows that he benefits from the legitimacy of Cameroonians, their support, and their good prayers. So he knows that at this material moment, he is going nowhere. Momentum in politics is the currency. Visibility is the capital. So if he is not visible, he is not going to have the currency to buy Cameroonians with, or to apply to Cameroonians, to relate with Cameroonians. And Chiroma, whatever one thinks of him, understands that political capital is better than most or anything that he can gain at this material moment. If you promise him the vice presidency or the prime ministerial office, Chiroma knows that what he's going to have in communion with Cameroonians over the next few weeks is worth much more than anything that could be promised to him. That is the salvation of Cameroon, breaking down a dictatorial regime that has survived on repression and force and brutality to maintain itself in power, not legitimacy, not the vote of the people. Chiroma's silence, in my view, is temporary because his political survival depends on completing the long journey that has just begun. You remember the Chinese proverb, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a step. Chiroma said he still had some steps, and we were just at step 3. So what is step 4? What is step 5? And what is step 6? One thing is for sure, Chiroma's return will not be the same as his initial statement. It may come in the form of an interview, a written communique, a broader critique of the political climate, rather than a direct confrontation. It may come as a public speech, as an appeal, rather than a threat. But he will return because the story he opened is not one he can afford to leave unfinished. Cameroonians are waiting on Chiroma, and Chiroma should listen and listen clearly. Cameroonians have sacrificed their blood, their time, their money, their energy, their resources, and you have given them hope. Cameroonians are waiting for you, and they know that you are coming to continue from where you ended. For most Cameroonians and supporters are anxious. They are patient, but they are not passive. Do not let their patience erode. It is just an observation, it is just an analysis, it is preparation for whatever comes next. This country is at a delicate moment, but not an unpredictable one. Political actors are repositioning, old alliances are weakening, new coalitions are forming, and Chiroma's ultimatum is one of the clearest signals that the post-electoral environment is far from settled. Cameroonians are looking up to Chiroma, and Chiroma has an obligation to satisfy Cameroonians. To the public, remain calm, not because calmness means acceptance, but because clarity requires patience. The next moves from Chiroma, in my view, would be decisive, and they would not come from a place of silence, but from a place of strategy, from a place where the silence he has observed since his ultimatum have shaped the strategy. Chiroma started something, he would definitely return to finish it. For now, the task is simple. Watch carefully, stay level-headed, and understand that we are in a new phase of Cameroonian politics, one in which even the old players are no longer playing by the old rules. Under Cameroonian politics, the system demands that those who have been playing since 1990 till today would be passive and accept the results and say, okay, let's try again in 2032. But Chiroma seems to have taken a different orientation, an orientation that does not tie with those who have given up. Almost all other politicians have given up. Chiroma is the last man standing. And I was super impressed today when I saw a speech by Iyodi telling Paul Biya that Cameroonians did not elect Paul Biya. And he went ahead to give a path to resolving Cameroon's problems. That is the type of that is the class of politicians that Cameroonians need. Those who speak out at moments like this. Even if Iyodi did not say what you wanted to hear, he actually positioned the conversation where the people wanted. The declaration by the Constitutional Council was illegitimate, meaning it is illegal. Iyodi is right, and Cameroonians need to continue towards that direction. For the Beyond Africa podcast, I have been your host, Ngalim Bernard. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for liking, subscribing, and sharing. See you in the next episode of the Beyond Africa podcast. Please tell us which of the 7 points you feel most aligned with and which of them you think is important for Chiroma to work on as he prepares to liberate Cameroonians.